How are you, Dale? Well, good morning and welcome to Sunday School on this 20th of December. You guys know what that means tomorrow is. I know the 21st. What's the 21st? The first day of winter. Yep, winter equinox or whatever they call that. Winter solstice. Yeah, tomorrow's the shortest day and then they start getting longer and you'll be able to tell right away. The confluence of two stars. Seems fitting for Christmas. We've had some fun stuff. Anybody see the Northern Lights? I wasn't able to. I got Omaha north of me, so I wasn't able to see anything. And we had a meteor shower, and now we got the moon getting full again. All kinds of fun stuff. We are in Joshua chapter 4 today. Hopefully everybody's got a handout that wants one. Malachi is handing those around. For those of you online, we do have that on the website as well if you want to jump over there and pick that up. Go to the homepage, click on Ministries, go down to Adult Sunday School, and you'll find it there. I had a request for that, so it's my reason for mentioning it. So chapter 3 that we covered last week was the crossing of the Jordan River. A very amazing, impressive miracle that God did for his people. Chapter 4 goes with that, and the gist of it is that it's a setting up of a memorial to remember that amazing event for the people of Israel and for their descendants. If you've read through chapter 4 already, you might be thrown off a bit by the fact that it gets very repetitive. We hear a number of times, so the Israelites crossed the river, or things like that, and you're like, I thought that already happened. Or the stones being set up for the memorial. It's repeated a number of times. In fact, we really have 4 sections in here: directive to create the memorial, and then a retrospective, kind of looking back at stuff that's already happened, and then another section about the memorial and why it was there, and ending up with a second retrospective that looks back and repeats some of the same events. So if you're expecting just straight narrative, you're going to get confused. But once you understand we've got a couple of different retrospectives in here looking back and rehearsing it again, I think it'll kind of make sense. Do you know why the author would write it that way? Yes, exactly, to stress how important it is. So he slows it way down. We're used to, Rahab and the spies, we just kind of, it's a storyline and we follow it all the way through. Well, here he slows it way down, and it's for emphasis. He really wants to pound home the significance of this memorial. Okay, so let's jump into it. We have quite a bit of parallel here between these. So in the first section, verses 1 to 3, God directs Joshua to build a memorial. Let's read that. It came about, Joshua chapter 4 and verse 1, it came about when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place or the campsite where you will lodge tonight. So that's God giving Joshua the directive. Here's what I want you to do. You might remember back in chapter 3 and verse 12, we had the statement, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from each tribe, and then he just stops. He doesn't say for what purpose. Well, here in chapter 4, we get the purpose. It's to pick up stones and to memorialize this event. These stones come out of the dry bed of the river. This may be an obvious point, but I'll just say it again. They're natural. They're not like cut and dressed and square, and they're just river rocks. Okay, so just big old round boulders or chunks of whatever stone was down there. That'll be important because I got some pictures coming up of that type of stone. Okay. I see that hand. You wonder, don't you? Did they compete to see who could pick up the biggest one? I'm going to come back to that and ask you when we actually get to them carrying them, how big you think they were. So keep that in mind. I like that question. Verses 4 to 7 are Joshua. So 1 to 3, God tells him what to do. 4 to 7, Joshua turns around and tells the guys what to do. Okay? Joshua 4 and verse 4. So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, cross again to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you will say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. So he sent, the people had crossed over, the priests and the ark were still in the riverbed, the dry riverbed. He sends the 12 men back in and asks them each to pick up a stone. What we're going to come to eventually is that their campsite is at a place called Gilgal. And we don't know exactly where that was at. There are 7, 8 different sites that have been proposed as possible locations of Gilgal. We know it's east of Jericho, and that's about all we know. Could have been anywhere from maybe as little as 1.5 miles from the bed of the Jordan, possibly as much as 5 miles. Jericho is about, 6 or 7 miles in? So somewhere in between there. What's the significance of that? It's a long walk with a rock. Exactly. So these guys aren't just going to pick up the biggest rock they can and move it 100 yards. They've got to carry this thing a ways. Okay? So that may impact our understanding of what size of rock they take too. On the other hand, you do want the largest you can get, right? I mean, it's going to be a memorial. You don't want a little handheld chunk. It's going to disappear into the landscape. Okay. Yeah. This is the rock from the tribe of Judah. And look at the one from Benjamin. Oh, dear. Hopefully they didn't carve their initials on them or anything. So Joshua also provides here, you pick that up, the rationale for this. Why are we doing this? It is as a memorial, not necessarily for us. We've all witnessed this. We all walked through the dry riverbed, but for generations to come. This is a key part of this entire chapter, the memorial aspect of what they're doing. Okay. So we had God-given direction to Joshua. Joshua turns around, gives direction to the 12 men, and now we have the 12 men actually obeying, and that's verses 8 and 9. Joshua 4, verse 8. And the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up the 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. And they carried them over with them to the lodging place, and put them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. Okay, so I should probably address that question first. Did that sound to you like two different stacks of rocks? Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, they may have paused there. Did I pick up too big a rock? But no, they got to end up at the campsite at Gilgal. He'll actually name that spot later on in the chapter here. Exactly. So, I want to try and convince you that there's only one stack of rocks. Yeah. Well, he picked 12 men. Mm-hmm. Well, we can keep that in mind. I'm pretty convinced it's 12 guys, each with one stone, but it may have been. Some of the biggest guys there, I don't know. A big guy can carry a pretty big rock. Right, Darren? Okay. There are a couple of English versions that phrase verse 9 differently. The NIV and the New American Bible, which is different than the NASB, state that Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan. I don't want to get too technical with you here, but I feel like otherwise you're not going to go with me on this, so I'll give you a little bit. There is a Hebrew word, betok. The b is a preposition. You know what a preposition is, right? In, at, with, by, to, for, things like that. And the tok is middle, so it looks like in the middle. But that preposition b can also have a variety of different meanings. If you look it up in a lexicon, hoof, you get probably a dozen different ways in which that preposition is used. And one of them is from, which doesn't sound like in to us, but I could point you to two different places, and without a Hebrew text, you're going to have trouble seeing this, but in Joshua 5:1, the next chapter, he uses that same preposition in the phrase from beyond the Jordan. Do you have something similar to that in your English version? It's phrased different ways in different English versions, but it's the same preposition. If we ran back to Joshua 3:16, the waters were cut off from Adam and clear down to the Dead Sea. And again, it's the same use of that same preposition, from. So I'm going to suggest that that's probably a better reading here, that in verse 9, instead of Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, that he's setting up the 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan. I also think Tricia asked that question. What's the purpose of 12 stones underwater in the middle of the river channel? And aren't they going to get washed away? And who can even see them? You know, if the water's this deep and your stones are this tall, how does that function as a memorial? Now, if there were no other alternatives on the way we read this, I'd say, I'm not sure, but I guess that's what the text says. But since I think there is an alternative way to understand this, I would suggest to you that it's better to read this as he set up the same 12 stones that had come from the middle of the Jordan, instead of a second set in the middle. And I think here he also connects it back when he says, verse 9. I was looking in verse 8, that's why I couldn't find it. In verse 9, I would say, from the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests who had carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. That's almost identical phrasing to what he used earlier in verse 3, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm. You see the similarity, and I would say the connection between those two. I think there's a lot of repetition in this chapter, and I think he's just referring back again to that same place from which these stones come. If you didn't like that, there's nothing more I can say to convince you. But to me, that it's legitimate to understand it that way from a grammatical standpoint, and I think it solves an issue that otherwise is just inscrutable. What? A memorial underwater in this muddy river? I don't understand the significance of this. And how in the world would the narrator know they're still there to this day? Okay. It does dry up sometimes now. There, some parts of the year there's still water flowing all the way down to the Dead Sea, but it's letting the level of the Dead Sea is dropping because there's not near so much water coming in annually. Has been dropping for a lot of decades. Okay, I need to. Oh man. Let me come back to that question. Are those pile of rock? Is that pile of rock still there? It was common in the ancient Near East for rocks to be used in I'm going to say in a cultic setting, and by cultic I just mean religious, whether authentic worship of the true God or pagan gods. These are some massive standing stones at Gezer, which is on the other side of the hills toward the west, that date to the Middle Bronze Age. They're not all massive. They almost look like Stonehenge size. They're really, you can see the little guy standing there, or gal, I'm not sure. Might be a girl. A few of them. Just show you a couple other examples. This is down in the desert, Timnah Valley, which is south of the Dead Sea even, at a little Egyptian cult place that the Egyptian miners had set up, and you can see there's just a couple of them are stacks and some of them are just independent standing stones. This is at the gate at Tel Dan, which is clear up in the north. Can you pick out the 5 standing stones there? It's a wall of stones, right? Okay, so I highlighted them because they do kind of tend to blend in. And this is fairly common in gates from the Iron Age and even earlier, and it's typically by archaeologists is associated with a little religious installation. They're about this big. They're not huge. You can see some leaves laying on the ground around them.
Because of when God directed building of arcs or altars,
Uh-huh.
uncut stone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect to see a cut stone
Yeah.
on the Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah. God specifically directed to make altars of uncut stone.
That and selecting the stones.
Yes. Although there's no mention here of these being set up as an altar. And that's one of my questions. I don't think we have an answer from the text. It just says he set them up. In what formation? Or you can probably think of some different ways they could be set up. It's to be a memorial. How might they have been set up? Could have been stacked. You see those sometimes? Here's a memorial up on a mountain pass in Lebanon. Big old stone, and there's a little concrete pillar thing too, but could have been set up in a circle. Give me some other options. In a row? Yep, in a line. Stepping stones? How about a double row? These are much earlier than the time we're talking about. This is down in the desert in southern Israel, a mountain, Har Karkom. Archaeologists assign them to the early Bronze Age, so time of Abraham perhaps. Interestingly enough, it is 12 stones, and they're set up in two lines, side by side, if you can count them, and it's on the back of your handout too. And they're about the size a guy could pick up, which is roughly what I would expect from our guys here. Stuff around them. I mean, they can't actually date when the stone was set up, but the material around them, potsherds, and I don't know if they found organic material that they could carbon-14 date or something. Well, down here it's super dry, and a few goats going through now and then, but that's about it. There's no cities or towns down here. It's just too barren for that.
I would see them kind of as, they had four tribes that came that when they would travel. Four tribes were on the east, north, south, and west in a certain order, so they could have set them up like a cross.
Yeah, a 3x4. Yeah. Yeah, they sure could have. To kind of represent the movement of the tribes together. Yeah. So how big do you think these were? A guy's got to pick it up, and he's got to carry it on his shoulder, probably anywhere from 1.5 miles to 5 miles. What do you think it weighed? Brent, what's a ruck pack when guys do a ruck march? 80 pounds. Now that's with straps and a nice backpack and big guys that are used to it. Now these guys may have been used to it. In this case, you got to set it on your shoulder. Well, we did have that one statement to put it carried on their shoulder in verse 5. Does that mean it had to be on one shoulder the entire way, that they couldn't carry? I don't know. But it doesn't sound like they're carting him or drag him. John?
Yeah, they used to use hods. It's like a miniature cart. It's kind of like a yoke that goes over your shoulder and has a box kind of thing on it.
Okay. So like a
That's what the Masons use.
like a strap.
Kind of like a V-shaped thing that would go over your shoulder like wood,
Uh-huh.
and then V the other way.
Okay.
Kind of like a bigger X that would sit on your shoulder and have, you hold it.
Yeah. Okay.
So you might have something down with it.
So if we use a contraption like that, you want to estimate a weight that could be carried?
Maybe 70.
Maybe 70? They got a little hike in front of them. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Get this thing off my shoulder. That would kind of be my guess too, is somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds if you got a couple miles to carry the thing. Really big guys could do more perhaps. Young guys. Really young guys. Yeah. Well, so if that's correct, I think the stone pile we're looking at here is not too far off of the size of stones that would have been carried. So that's a pretty chunky stone. It's not a megalith like what we saw at Gezer. Those massive things. These are not super impressive once you've got them in place. It's impressive when you're carrying it. I got to keep moving. Verses 10 to 14 is our first retrospective of the crossing. So it's like we're going back and rehearsing again what happened. Joshua 4 and verse 10. For the priests who carried the ark were standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. We're going to come back to that. And the people hurried and crossed. Wait, I thought they were already over. Oh yeah, we're just kind of rehearsing it again. And it came to pass, when all the people had finished crossing, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed before the people, and the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over in battle array before the sons of Israel, just as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed for battle before the Lord to the desert plains of Jericho. And on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they feared or revered him, just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. This is kind of a fun picture out of Egypt. These are priests carrying the royal bark, which is kind of an antique word for boat, on their shoulders, which is kind of what the priests of Israel were doing as well, carrying a big box on their shoulder. Not as heavy and probably not requiring as many guys as what you see here, but I know the tomb of Tutankhamun or King Tut, when they opened that up, there were a number of different items in there that had carrying poles on them as well that were meant to be carried by these long poles or handles. So the priests are down in there. The three tribes that had left their families to the east and come to conquer, as Moses had commanded, were part of this group as well. They're specifically mentioned along with a number in verse 13. The insertion of Moses in here is kind of interesting as well. What had Moses commanded that Joshua is obeying? You pick that up, that Joshua was also following Moses' command. Well, one of the things was specifically that these three tribes were to go with them to conquer the land. That's mentioned in Deuteronomy 31, as well as Numbers 32. And that's specifically noted here as being fulfilled. And then at the end of this rehearsal of these events, we read that Joshua was greatly revered. Feared is a literal wooden sort of way of saying it. The people really respected him now because of this whole event, crossing the Jordan with the floodwaters dried up. Okay, Verse 15, I'll go through 18 here. Now the Lord said to Joshua, by the way, we're going to have the exact same sequence here again. God speaks to Joshua, Joshua speaks to the people. So God is communicating everything through Joshua. It's the same pattern as we saw in the first set. The Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they may come up from the Jordan. So Joshua turned around and commanded the priests, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over all its banks as before. So that's where we get that notation that this was in flood stage when this whole event happened. And now they returned to flooding over the banks as they had previously. This is kind of a fun photograph. It does not capture what happened here, but it's a smidgen of a picture. This is a dry riverbed in Wadi Zin, and they've gotten rain much further upstream, an unusual, rare type of rain, and the water is washing down the dry riverbed. Well, creeping down the dry riverbed. A lot of foam at the front end that is white and makes it very visible. This is a very tame event compared to what I'm convinced happened with the Jordan River, when I would expect there was a wall of water. I don't know if you've ever seen YouTube video of that kind of thing, a dam breaking or just a flash flood in a confined canyon or something. I mean, in fact, there have been a number of hikers killed in Israel in the past couple of years, groups of students or whatever that were down in a riverbed, a dry one like this, when the flood waters came through, and they couldn't get out quick enough, and they've lost a number of people from that kind of thing even in the last few years. So, but it was the closest thing I could find for a picture to kind of illustrate that. But you can imagine the return of the river to this area during flood stage. You don't want to be anywhere close to that riverbed at that point. Okay. Moving on to verse 19. Joshua 4 and verse 19. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. The first month is the month of Nisan, and we have kind of looked at this before. Sometime March, April, it's springtime, and they're on the 10th day of that month. The 14th day is Passover. So they're just a few days before Passover, and we will read in upcoming text that they observe Passover there. We also get the notification that their camping place is Gilgal. Let me get my pointer out here. So they crossed the Jordan here somewhere. Here is Jericho at the foothill, at the foot of the hills of what became Judea. And then all these other yellow dots are places that have been suggested as locations of Gilgal. And I should just say a couple things about that. It seems unlikely that Gilgal was a city. You might think that initially. They went and camped at Gilgal. Well, of course, that's a town, right? Probably not. It's probably a site. We read about it a number of times in later texts. I should look and make sure I get them. In Judges, the judge Ehud that has the knife on the offside and stabs Eglon. Eglon had put up a palace at Jericho, and Ehud came down to Gilgal to offer sacrifice and bring tribute. Sounds like a religious place, doesn't it? not necessarily a town. Saul appears at this Gilgal a couple of times. One is for his first public coronation. Samuel brings him down to Gilgal to crown him king before all the people. Why Gilgal? Well, it may actually be because they're also offering sacrifice there, and it happens before the Lord. It may be that the tabernacle was there at that point. And you can see that there would be some historical significance to this site for the Israelites. It's their first campsite when they came over. They'd set up these memorial stones there. Gilgal was also the place where Saul went after he had defeated the Amalekites. And he had Agag, the king, with him that he had failed to kill. And Samuel met him down there and said, "This is it. You're done. No more kingship for you." That was also at Gilgal. So the only identifying feature that one might suspect would still be there today would be a little pile of 12 stones. Right? Given what was probably the fairly small size of these stones, I wouldn't expect 3,500 years later-ish, I wouldn't expect that they would still be identifiable. And it could be, let's see, I don't have a good satellite photo for you. In the last 150 years, the modern city of Jericho has grown quite a bit, and there are plantations all over this area now because of irrigation, using modern techniques. And it wouldn't surprise me if the place that had for thousands of years been revered as Gilgal has now been erased. That's happened a bunch of other places up in the hills and that kind of thing. So we're sort of left to guess as to where this might be. Who asked me about still finding the 12 stones? Was that Joan? Was that Trish again? You're going to get a couple of stars today, right? Yeah, so that's kind of my answer to that. I would love to go do a survey back and forth and find these things, but I also know there's a fairly large area now that's cultivated plantation. They grow banana trees and orange trees and stuff down there, palms, date palms. I would be really surprised at this point if we're able to find still lined up, recognizable, the 12 stones that Joshua put up here. Unfortunately, because that'd be a lot of fun to find and say, "Hey, it's Gilgal." Let's see, verse 20. "And those 12 stones which they had taken up from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal." That's like is that the third time we've read that? There's a lot of repetition in this chapter. "And he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What are these stones?' then you shall inform your children, saying, 'Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you might fear the Lord your God forever." So once again, he repeats the purpose of this memorial. It's for future generations so that they remember this as well. And it's for Gentiles, that they might see and understand that God is mighty, that he has done an astounding feat here.
All the repetition between chapters 3 and 4, I've been trying to figure out if it's part of a literary biasness, I think this is right.
Okay.
Or if it's just to make a point. Have you figured that out?
there's definitely structure to it. We have the narrative section with God speaking, Joshua speaking, people obeying. Reiteration of the events. God, Joshua, people obey. Reiteration of the events. They're clearly parallel sections. True. Uh-huh. Yeah, not a chiasm like a poetic type thing. That's But there's definitely structure to it, and it sets a little odd with us when we're thinking we're just reading narrative, and then we keep getting the same. Well, I thought that already happened. Well, I thought that already happened. It just keeps getting repeated. But he's doing that on purpose to slow it way down and just keep pounding home the same message. I'll do this quick. I know most of you don't read Greek, and Abigail, it might take you a little while trying to figure this out. This is the Medeba map. It's 6th century A.D. It was found at the site of Medeba at a Byzantine church. It was the floor. This is just a little section of it. We have Gilgal and the Dodecalithon, 12 stones. You recognize both of those words, right? And how many? Dodeca? That's 12. Yeah. Deca? We use deca as 10 all the time. Dodeca, yeah. And lithon, I mean, we use lithograph. We use that word in English a lot too. And here it is. A little pile of double row. What do you know? If you count the little white dots, there's 12. So somebody, I mean, this is not, you couldn't like pinpoint GPS coordinates off of this map. But, and right here we have Jericho, and it's the city of the palms, and sure enough, there's some palm trees around it. So, 6th century A.D., but somebody had memorialized that there. Yeah, the Jordan River, it's actually got, it looks like a, what do you call that, a boat that goes across on a string, a ferry, and then it's got some fish in it, and then here's the Dead Sea, northern end of the Dead Sea. And then Jerusalem would be off the map, and it's got a pretty cool map of Jerusalem there. Oh, it's little rocks, mosaic, tiny little squares that somebody put together to make a picture. Medeba, it's in Jordan. It's not terribly far from Mount Nebo, but there was a Byzantine church there, and this was the floor, a large map of ancient Israel. So it's got some kind of fun stuff on it. It tells you what the tradition was in the 6th century, and I just thought it was kind of fun that they pointed out Gilgal and the place of the 12 stones. That was extra. You don't have to pay for that. Sixth century A.D. Yeah, so centuries after the time of Christ, so 2,000 years after Joshua. So it's not contemporary with him by any stretch, but still kind of fun.
Does that mean that in 1,400 years somebody's going to find bronze wall hanging?
It could be. It could be. It'd be fun to come back here and see what's still around, right? Ron, you're going to become famous. Okay, I gotta wrap this up. Some points to ponder if you're the type that likes to fill in your handout. God's mighty acts should inspire awe in us. That's exactly what this was. It was an awe-inspiring event, and that's appropriate. We should be impressed by that. And I would take away from this too, it shouldn't be necessary for us to be an eyewitness of each of these events in order to be impressed by them. I think that's the purpose of the memorial. Pass this along. Tell your kids. They need to know this. They don't need to be there to see it in order to be impressed by it, to realize the significance of it. The memorial should remind, and that should be sufficient. Reminds me of so many things. I'll just pick one. Jesus with the story of the beggar and the rich man. Sorry, what's his name? Lazarus. Thank you. And the rich man wants to send Lazarus back to tell his brothers, hell is real. And Abraham's response, they have the law and the prophets. If they don't believe that, even somebody coming back from the dead is not going to convince them. And we're kind of in that same boat. Set up the memorial stones. Tell your kids. They don't have to see it. You don't have to be an eyewitness yourself in order to believe. And then I think God is honored by the recitation of his good acts for his people. It's hard to know how to tell each of you to apply that. Not all of you have kids yet, or may never. It's appropriate in so many settings, though. I know God has done stuff for each one of us. Cleansed our soul. I can't describe each of your individual situations, but you know that there are things that God has done for you that you're like, hard to believe. Well, don't just keep that to yourself. Let other folks know. Let your kids know. Let your kids in Sunday school know. Let your nieces and nephews know. Be bold about that kind of stuff. You don't necessarily need to go set up a rock in the front yard. It might work. Somebody comes over, what's that rock for? Oh, well, it's a reminder. You could do that, but it's not necessary that you do it that way. But I think even us just studying this fulfills a lot of that too. We read it, we rehearse it, we look at it, we're reminded of the mighty hand of God, the way that he has worked. And we learn who he is, what he's capable of, his love for his people, and we are his people, his love for us. Good to study and recite and remember, and I think God is honored by that as well. Last minute questions? No? Good. Oh, okay, Katie. Would the early church have identified the site and memorialized it? That's pretty common that they did that kind of thing. Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, a dozen of them in Jerusalem itself. I'm not aware of any Byzantine church building set up down in this region. It would be kind of fun if there was. And they did a lot of that. That's a great question. But I'm not aware of anything here. Maybe so. Maybe so. We recognize these 12 stones. Okay. Let me close this in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for giving us, through many generations, giving us this account. We do stand in awe of your mighty work, and we know that you care for your people, and that includes us. Help us to be aware of that and to live our lives in light of that. Help us to be grateful to you for the way that you have worked in our lives, the way you take care of us, the things you have done for us. Help us to be bold, too, in proclaiming that to other people and being witnesses of the things that you have done in our lives. Ask for your blessing now on the service to come. In your name I pray. Amen.